Well, good evening, everyone. We are back again. Thank you for staying with us. We had our little technology glitch here. I think the heat wave here in New York City is causing a little internet issues right here, right now. But I'm Cheryl Benton. I'm so excited to welcome you all here for this really special evening to celebrate Stephanie Sloan and her beautiful book of poems called Dear Me, Poems of Loss, Grief, and Hope in New York's Darkest Days. And we are just so delighted to have you here, Stephanie. So, are you excited?
I'm very excited. I'm excited the second time around.
I
I was
know, I
even
am too. So, we really want to thank you all. And I know we have a lot of Stephanie's friends here tonight too. And you can leave comments, and I'll try to pop in comments as we can
great.
as we go along. But first of all, I just want to say that it was such a privilege for me to be able to publish Stephanie's really incredible book, which we're going to be talking about tonight. And she has some wonderful close friends with her this evening live to help us with this too. But losing a loved one, as we know, is always a tragic event. And for Stephanie, it became even harder when she lost her husband, Mike, of 58 years, just at the start of the COVID lockdown. And like so many others to follow, there was a funeral on Zoom, and then Stephanie was left alone in her apartment in New York to mourn by herself without the reality of having real hugs and a shoulder to cry on. So it was such a difficult time for her. Um, but we're going to talk about how the poems really started to turn that around. But before we get into that tonight, for those of you who may not know a lot about Stephanie, let me tell you about her, because she's really an incredibly accomplished woman. She's a native New Yorker born in the Bronx. It doesn't get any more native than that. And she calls New York City home now, one of her homes. And she has had a really eclectic career encompassing many different creative endeavors, most of them in the art and the theater world. She's written two plays, Toujours l'Amour, which has been staged in New York City last year, actually, and Bronx Light, Bronx Dark. And it was the loss of her husband at the same time as the pandemic that prompted her to write her first, but as she says, not her last book of poems. So, Stephanie, let's start about. I know you had told me that in the very beginning you felt so paralyzed by everything that happened and what you were feeling that you just couldn't even move. What happened, and then how did that start to change?
It took a while. I'm going to summarize because I would say maybe about 5 or 6 weeks later, a friend, my friends were great, my family was great, and everybody checked in on me. But, it's as you say, it's not the same as having people around. And one of my friends who checked in on me has been a friend since college and just wanted to see how I was doing. And I was very honest and I said, I can't do anything. I can't read, I can't write, I can't cook, I can't watch TV, whatever it is, I can't do it. And he said to me, why don't you write another play? And I said, that's out of the question, absolutely impossible. I couldn't write another play if my life depended on it. So he said, why don't you write a poem? And I said, I guess I could do that. So that night I wrote a poem and I it made me feel better. So I decided I would write a poem every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes at night. And I did share the first one and a few others with friends, and everybody seemed to really like it, like the poems. And they just, and people started telling me that even though they hadn't lost a loved one, they identified with what I was writing about. Um, so it just sort of, I know everybody.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and that's really one of the beautiful things about these poems, because whether you live in New York City or any place else, we have all gone through loss and grieving on some level, whether we've had someone as personal as you have. And what's so beautiful about your poems is you recognize that at some point along the way too, right? So I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I did recognize that I wasn't the only one grieving. So, although it might have felt that way, it wasn't, and I wasn't, and other people could relate. So,
And when did you start taking the photographs? When did that become?
right around the same time, but honestly, I didn't think of putting them together. They were two separate things for me. I was writing the poems, I was taking photos, sometimes from my window, sometimes in my apartment, and then occasionally as I ventured out of the apartment and saw the empty streets. I could see them from my window, but it wasn't quite the same as being there. And so I started taking pictures, but it really didn't come together until the end.
And when did you feel that, when did you make that decision that this could actually become a book? Because I know writing a book of poems was certainly not on your bucket list for
It
sure,
was
right?
not. I had a very small bucket list. I always wanted to be in a Woody Allen movie, and I was. I managed to be an extra in three. But writing a poem, a book of poetry was never, writing a book was never on my list. So it wasn't until I had a lot of poems that people started saying, a couple of people said to me, you know, you should publish these. And wasn't it wasn't my idea, but I thought that if they thought they were good, maybe there's something there, and maybe I should pursue it. So
Well, and we're so glad you did and that you're sharing them with everyone. And now that you are sharing them with everyone, I know that so many people have said that they've said, Stephanie, you're very brave. I think I said that to you too. How do you feel when people say that to you?
I don't feel brave. I don't know. It's just something I never think about, thought about. I just did what I had to do in order to feel better. And really, when I started writing, I was writing for myself. I wasn't writing for anybody else. And that might be why they sound authentic, because they are.
Exactly. And what would you like people to take away from this? And I know you've learned some things, a lot of things through this about, I think you said surprises and happiness.
Right. Well, I think the coronavirus has kind of it forced us to look at our lives and see what it is we want to do next. Um, I know we're not always in control of that, especially now, but we have some control. And I think this is the time to really stop and figure out what it is we want to do, what will make us happy. And the the whole the whole thought of surprises is something that's always been with me. In fact, it's not in this book, but it's in one of my plays. That I like surprises generally, and sometimes I have to surprise myself. And I think writing the book was one of those good surprises. They aren't always good, and we have to accept that. It's sort of, well, it's surprises, but it's also following where life leads you. Um, and
That's so beautifully said. And now I know you're going to read us one of the poems, which is actually from the early days of the book, the beginning of the book, and it's just really beautiful. So I want you to share that with everyone listening tonight.
okay, it's Pretty Prison, uh, dated May 4th, 2020. If someone had told me just a few months ago that I, a native New Yorker, would come to hate New York City, I wouldn't have believed them. Yet here I am now in this pretty prison.
That is so beautiful. And I know that's just an example of how we can all relate to those poems. And I think there's a point where everybody felt like that. So I think it's just so beautiful and so poignant. So as I said, we have a lot of Stephanie's friends here tonight who are here to celebrate with you and have some words. And one of them is Alan. Good evening, Alan. We're so happy you're here with us.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
So let me tell our audience just a little bit about you. Alan is a longtime friend of Stephanie's husband, Mike. They went to college together, and I know you've known Stephanie a very, very long time too, from those college days. And Alan spent his career in advertising and marketing. And as you're going to see, Stephanie is very, very accomplished women, and accomplished people attract other accomplished people. So we just have an amazing array of guests tonight. So thank you, Alan, for being one of them.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And I'd like to sort of start this off with a word about Mike. I have my book. And in fact, I bought a few of them. There are certain people I want to make sure have a copy. Dear Me is dedicated to Stephanie's late husband, Michael Allen Sloan, who passed away early in the pandemic, though not from COVID-19. Mike was my friend for some 65 years. He was the epitome of what's defined as a people person. He was adored and admired because of his warmth, his smile, his uproarious sense of humor, his intelligence, common sense, his caring and love for his family, his friends, his business associates, and also because of his sensitive way of connecting with virtually everyone he knew. Let me move this a little bit, I'm sorry. Mike is, in spirit, central in the creation of Dear Me. Also central is Stephanie's remarkable ability to sublimate. During a tragic and dystopic period, some of the enormous impact of Mike's illness and death at the very moment when her city, New York City, was becoming something other than the New York City all of us have known. And to rechannel that with her clipped, incisive, and poetic phrases, and with penetrating subtlety, and with artistic photography, Stephanie created and preserved in 64 pages a story that belongs in the annals and archives of New York City history. That's what she's produced, with Mike so deeply etched in her mind, in her memories, and in her very essence. So as we celebrate the publication of Dear Me, I want to offer a toast to my friend Mike and to his dear and talented Stephanie. I'm down in South Florida, so my toast is with oranges. So here we go. So here's to Mike. I got this camera at a while. Here's to Mike Sloan and his dear Stephanie, and to Dear Me.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was so, I know that was from the heart. There was a reason.
That was so beautifully said. And
Yes.
Stephanie, by the way, I know you've got a very special glass too that you're drinking out of tonight. So share what that's about. Show it to everyone because I just love it.
This, I made myself a cosmopolitan during the pandemic. I've learned how. And the glass belonged to my parents. So it's 1930 something, Art Deco, and I've managed not to break it.
Well, that's beautiful. And I know that they're here tonight somewhere too and being very, very proud of you.
So.
And now we have another one of your friends who's joining us tonight. And this is Wendy. And I think one of the things you're going to find out tonight, if you didn't already know this about Stephanie, is she has so many friends from so many different areas of her life, but she has lifelong friends. And Wendy is one of them. Wendy has known Stephanie. They've been friends since kindergarten. I think that is truly amazing. And not a lot of us can actually say that. Wendy has degrees in English and literature. She spent her career in academia. And Wendy, you recently wrote just such a wonderful review and analysis. You really looked in depth at Stephanie's poems. And I know you've taught poetry at the college level, so it was really special. And one of the things that really struck me, especially, was when you said the poems are like eavesdropping into Stephanie's grief and loss. So, can you talk to us a little bit about the poems? And of course, your dear friend Stephanie.
Oh, true. I do know Stephanie. We're in kindergarten class, so that's long. That's really long. When Steffi started writing the poems, she would send them back. And I was one of the people who was encouraging her to, I thought they were beautiful. And I was encouraging her to do something or writing or whatever. But as I was reading them, especially when they started to accumulate, I suddenly realized I was reading them the wrong way. I was reading them as a friend trying to give support to a friend who had really suffered in the most incredible ways. But she deserved more than that. She deserved reading as a poet. The poems were so beautifully written in so many ways that they really stand on their own and should be looked at for what they are. And that's what compelled me to start, I guess, analyzing them as I would a major poet, analyzing them as I would if I were teaching a class. When you teach poetry, poetry is considered the most difficult genre within literature to teach because it's often considered inaccessible. And these poems are very accessible. I mean, I think that everyone who's going to speak tonight is going to talk about their accessibility. And the first question you always teach students to ask is, who's speaking? And in this case, the speaker was I being Stephanie. And what she's doing really is musing. The poems are self-musings about her crises. And as she moves on, a communal crisis. But it seemed to me what she was allowing us to do was eavesdrop. We were listening to her. Her audience, because the question number 2, after who's speaking, the next question is, to whom is she speaking? And I truly believe Stephanie was speaking to herself. The questions she was asking, the observations she was making about her own situation, the situation out in the world, were directed at herself, and they extended to the outside world to the extent that the community, New York City residents, were feeling what she was feeling because of the pandemic. So there were 2 strains in the poem, the poems collectively. There was her own personal crises, which is the I, and then there's the communal crises, which is the we. And for me, one of the real strengths of the poems is the way she very subtly and gracefully brings the 2 together. And I'm just going to point out some notes I took because I want to give everybody a sense of the chronology. She starts off I, and the earliest poems are very bleak. They are so depressing because this is what Stephanie's state was at the time. And then she becomes aware of the pandemic and starts to pull the pandemic into her poetry. And she uses it both to parallel and heighten her own situation, but also she sees it as a way of embodying her own loneliness, her own sadness, her own confusion, and her own isolation. So on May 5th, for the first time, she moves beyond I, and in a very effortless and subtle way transforms herself to we. She connects, and I'm going to read here a line. She connects her own unmoored state to all of us who were into crises. We have become unmoored. We have no questions, only answers. We have no idea of the future. And then on May 24th, she really brings the two strains, her personal crises and the COVID-19 crises together. We're mourning the lives we had and didn't appreciate until they were gone. And that is, I think, a critical moment in the volume. In the very first poem, she says, everyone says I'm strong. Am I? This is what you asked. And I think the question of whether she is strong underlies every poem in the volume. It's there, and there's no escaping it. She, in the very bleak moments, she talks about Pretty Prison, the city, the half-shuttered windows, the drawn shades, the shuttered stores, the empty streets. Her voice is quiet. Her voice is direct. It's honest, and it's grounded. It's wonderful. It's simple, and the verse is simple and succinct. Critics use the word clean to talk about this kind of verse. It's just there. Only the essential is there. And I was struck by the fact that there's no angry emotional outburst. Steffi had every reason to be angry. There's no anger. There's no extraneous or lyrical diversions in any way. There's no appeals to God or theology. This is what we have here. And she starts asking questions, and the questions she asks are the questions we were all asking. We're all in the same boat. We become a community. We share the same fears, the same isolation, and the same desire to survive. And that's critical. It's the desire to survive that suddenly enters the poems. May 16, she's still mourning, she's still sad, but there's a glimmer. There's her first glimmer of her strength and her resiliency, and I would argue an innate spirit, which I think has been true of Stephanie since I know her, and that's since kindergarten. On May 16th, a positive sign, just for a moment, she goes to the window. She looks outside. It's 7 o'clock, and she hears all the noise. People are celebrating the medical staff, who are all the healthcare workers who are really putting their own lives on the line to tend to the sick people. Then May 7th, even better, she goes to the park. She meets a friend. This is going out into the community. And then May 19th is a really significant moment because she herself goes to the window at 7 o'clock and she bangs. It's brief, it's a brief bang, but it's one that feels good. And these are good signs. I mean, the paralysis is still there. And that's going to be there. That's inevitable. She's just suffered an extraordinary loss. But she's joined the community, and now she starts to think of ways to break the paralysis, to join in the community again. And she turns to old reliables. As everyone who knows Steffi knows, Steffi loves to buy and sell real estate and fix up houses. So what's the first thing she does? She thinks about moving and fixing up an old house. The question is where? Again, she goes back to her past. She goes back to a time and place where she was happy. She goes back to Monterey, which is close to Great Barrington, where she spent every summer of her life, certainly since I knew her. She's sad and she's rueful. She recognizes suddenly, I'm not married anymore. I'm a widow. I don't feel like a widow, but I'm a widow. Here I am. Is it possible? I've once had a wonderful life. Is it possible I can again? Another turning point. She says, I loved the old one. but all my waking moments are not sad. The bad memories of the last few months are not fading, but there are cracks. And she's beginning to realize she can replace what she had with something good. As I mentioned this to Cheryl, I think, as I thought about her impulse to write poetry, I realized she was following in the footsteps of many, many female writers who wrote about their beloved husbands. I mean, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Maya Angelou, Anne Bronte, and of course, Jo Didion in prose come to mind. Like these very wonderful writers, and I'm proud to put her in this category, she forced herself to write. Once she realized writing was of some benefit, she used the written record that she was creating to reflect on her memories and all her complicated emotions since Mike died, and to take control by putting her feelings and observations down on paper. And it's very important. I mean, the first thing she did was very carefully record the date of each poem. She's creating a record of this growth, this evolution. In putting everything down and chronicling her evolution, she not only took control, she brought in her reality. I mean, two of the poems that I love, one is when she thinks about food, meals. It's not just any meal she thinks about. It's the stuffed cabbage, her favorite. Her grandmother's, I mean, she's linking the past. She's bringing the past into the future. The golden raisins, do they still exist? My God. She thinks of the packages outside, food, laundry, underwear, emery boards. I mean, the diverse aspects of her life. Did she order this stuff? She must have. Or did she? I mean,
Wendy, Stephanie's actually going to be reading that one, and that's actually one of my really favorite ones too, and it's one that I think everyone can relate to. And I have to say, I know that Stephanie is so honored, and as am I as her publisher, to hear a literary person put her in the category of some of those extraordinary poets. So we thank you so much for sharing your insight into her poems, that people will really see them on such a wonderful, deeper level. So thank you for being one of our people tonight.
And that is that out of this chaos, she created a beautiful volume.
Thank you.
She brought a fragile order to her life, to our reading, and she's provided something that's very meaningful. So thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Wendy. I knew early on, Cheryl, when you asked about when I decided to publish, it was when Wendy liked what I wrote.
I know, and I'm so glad that she brought into this one of her favorite poems, which I know everyone here will relate to, and I know you're going to read it. And that's the one called What I Look Forward to. And I'm going to pop up the image of this because it was one that actually made me chuckle too, which a lot of them didn't.
No, they're not full of chuckles. Okay, May 13th, 2020, What I Look Forward to. A bell rings and I find a mystery package outside my door. Sometimes it's food, sometimes laundry, sometimes a combination of goodies that don't go together. A book, underpants, emery boards, all in the same box. Left outside my door by mysterious strangers whose faces I never see. When the package makes it inside, there it sits for its second life. 24 hours for cardboard, 3 hours for paper, 2 days for cloth. A junkyard of assorted, mismatched items that felt essential when they were ordered.
That is just beautiful. And I know that is definitely one we can all relate to. And now we have another one of Stephanie's friends, and I'm so excited to bring her in tonight, right now. And that's Jane Goldman. Jane is part of your, you have so many different circles of friends. She's part of your wonderful group of New York City friends. And let me just tell people a little bit about Jane. She's another one of these very accomplished women. She's a retired corporate attorney, and now she pursues sculpting and art and writing and music. And I was actually so excited because Jane was my very first author with her beautiful book called With No Regrets, Growing Older, Face It, Live It, Love It. So, Jane, we are so happy to have you here tonight to share in this celebration and excitement for Stephanie's book.
And Cheryl, shall I say I have no regrets about having published that book, especially with you. And I congratulate you, Stephanie. I'd like to talk about two things. One, Stephanie as a person, and also Stephanie as a writer. Unlike Wendy, I met Stephanie in my adult years. We only became friends about 15 or so years ago. And we became very good friends. And sometimes that's not so easy when you're older, but we did. And I thought I knew Stephanie, and I thought she knew me. And we both had have a very close relationship. But I think nobody really even knows themselves or anybody that they know until they go through a crisis. And that's when who we really are becomes apparent. And if I knew Stephanie before all that just happened these months as a strong, determined, talented woman, it gave new meaning to all of that when I saw what she went through, not only as a devoted wife to Mike, being by his side every day in the hospital when it was very dangerous to be in the hospital. That was the beginning of the virus. And the magnitude of what she knew was to be her loss came to me one night. We were talking, we spoke several times every day. And that was a time too, we began not to be able to see each other. And one night she said to me, she was cooking, and she said, "This is the first time I've ever cooked just for myself." And I thought, wow, she actually had gone from her parents' home to becoming a wife. And now she's a wife and a mother, and she had never cooked for just herself. And this was just the beginning of that acknowledgement that this was a new world she was going to enter into. That is the time when I began to understand who Stephanie, under all the layers that all of us have, who she really was. She continued to be with Mike knowing what the end thing was going to be. And she could have curled herself up into her apartment, cried, been depressed, felt sorry for herself, as she should have, because to lose somebody of 58 years and to lose him at a time when she would not be able to get the support. We would all be supporting you, Stephanie, in our words and calls, but we couldn't be there to hug you, hold you, take you to dinner, distract you. So you were alone. For a person who has never been alone in her life, you were going to be alone in a way that all of us were now experiencing. And that was going to be the beginning of showing who you really were. Not that I ever doubted there would be that strength. And at first, as you wrote, you couldn't write, you couldn't do things, and that obviously had to be that way. And then you started taking pen to paper or your hands to a computer. And then these words came out. And having written a book myself, I understand how hard it is to find the exact word or what you really want to say. And it seemed when you began to send me your writings, and you did every few days, you found the words, you nailed the words. You would say in just a few sentences, in very simplistic language, so much that you did not need volumes. You said it all in just a few paragraphs. And then you began to take photos unrelated to even doing the book, and you would send them to me. And the photos to me began to be saying as much, pictures can say 1,000 words. Well, they did. You could have done a book just of photos. And then you decided to do this as a book. And I was great and encouraging and wonderful that you went to Cheryl, who I think is such the perfect person, to understand all of what you were saying. And then the beginning of your writings were just like what Wendy was talking about. They dealt a lot with your own loss and should be about that. And then as you expanded and began to talk about all of our losses, because all of us were experiencing the loss of our freedom, of choices, and you began to not only, I wasn't just sympathetic to your plight as somebody going through what you were going through, but you began to talk to me as to what I was going through and what my friends were going through, and you expanded all of that. And what I think is so significant about what you wrote and why people should read it is because with all that you went through and losing a mate of 58 years and learning to live on your own, you didn't talk about self-pity, you talked about hope. And you talked actually about choosing happiness as a possibility for a future life. In my book, I dealt with that issue, and I raise it not to talk about my book, but because when I dealt with the question of happiness, I wondered whether it could be by choice, or were you just born a happy-go-lucky or not? And I thought to myself, as I thought about it, you can choose to be happy or not. And right now, with all of us being so inundated with such awful news and with the loss of our freedom, that every day we could all want to curl up in bed and cry and feel self-pity and wonder where is the world going. But instead, we could take the news that we get, the little good news, and think of what we're getting, not what's being taken away. And I think your book, going through the loss of a mate of 58 years, learning to live on your own, and to be able to come out at the end of your book by saying that you're going to choose to be happy, I think it is a lesson to all of us to choose to be able to know that we're going through a horrendous time in our world, but there are hopeful signs, and we can be positive, and we should be positive. And I think your book is just a testament to that. I congratulate you, not for putting this, by the way, I never questioned here you were a playwright, you never wrote plays, you write a play. You made jewelry, you never made jewelry, you wrote it, you did it. You were an actress, you now became a poet. That's the other thing that you're teaching us during this horrible time, that each of us could look into ourselves and maybe find gifts that we didn't know that we had. And if there were ever a time now to look deep into ourselves, as others have said, this is that time to find in ourselves those things, especially those creative things that could give meaning to our lives now, to discover things, be surprised by the talents we discovered. But it was no surprise to me, Stephanie, what I learned about who you are as a person. I'm grateful for your wonderful friendship. I knew it didn't surprise me that you would have this strength, determination, and I appreciate you sharing your strength and your hope and your positive feelings for all of us who really need now to really also have that hope and positive feelings. So thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your grief and helping us to know that we too can overcome obstacles. If you can, we certainly can too.
Thank you so much, Jane. I knew you'd get it.
That was so beautifully said, as only Jane can say it. And by the way, we do have people leaving comments. I'll just pop a couple of them up. This is from Patrick White. He said, glad to see you, Stephanie. Take your broken heart and turn it into art. I think you've done that with this book of poetry. That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And then from the beautiful Carol Sue Gershman to the beautiful Stephanie saying you look beautiful. So that's great. Thank you, Carol Sue. I know she appreciates that too. And now we have another one of your longtime friends who's here and coming on. I just love all of these wonderful connections.
Me too.
So now we're going to invite Phyllis Bard. You and Phyllis have known each other since high school because you were both cheerleaders. And look at you, I can still see the teenage cheerleaders today. You still both look like teenagers. This is so great. So Phyllis is another one of Stephanie's accomplished friends. She's a psychotherapist. She's a teacher of mind-body connection and on healthy aging. So Phyllis, we're so glad you're here too tonight to help to celebrate Stephanie.
I'm so happy to be here. She's very special. So, yes, we did originally bond over cheerleading, but let's move to the present because what's happening now is so important. So, as you all know by now, Stephanie is resilient and passionately self-aware. Dare Me is a major piece of writing written with brutal honesty that speaks to every one of us with raw emotion. This morning, I presented Dear Me as a gift to my daughter Val, not sure how she would connect with it. I watched her face as she read it. The quiet became punctuated with a series of wow, wow. When she came to the end, she read the last poem, and with tears drifting down her cheeks, she said, I'm so touched that after all she has been through, she could still find hope. Major. So if you know Stephanie, that was no surprise, as her everyday life was always filled with creative impulses. Her artistic output a continual joy to observe. But after Mike died, as she's already told you, she was lost for a little while, unable to leave the pretty prison of her apartment. The trauma she went through was so real that she needed to get back in touch with friends and her creative self. Many invitations to meet, to take a walk, were turned down until she finally agreed and agreed to meet me in Central Park. I saw her inner strengths binding her together, holding her up. But would she find her way out of the darkness that all of us were in, but she in particular? And amazingly, she did. On May 17th, when she returned home from the park, Steffi wrote a poem called A Spring Day. As with this, every poem in Dear Me is born directly from her experience and from her heart. I know this is the beginning of a new journey for her and a new genre, sure. There is no limit to what she can and what she will create in this clear path to her future. So, blessings, my friend.
Thank you. Phyllis is the friend I met in the park, obviously, and has helped me through this awful time. But anyway, it's good to have old friends.
I think it's a blessing for me to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. So that's so great. You are definitely blessed with wonderful friends, Stephanie, from so many different parts of your life.
No, I wish
And
they
now we
could
have
all be here tonight.
Huh?
I wish they could all be here tonight.
I know, but I know a lot of them are here listening because unfortunately we can't get everyone into the
I know
studio, and we couldn't have a live event where everyone could have been with you in person, but we at least could do this virtually, even with the technology hiccups. So it's just another great way to at least connect with people, and I think that's so important. And we have another friend of yours, Elena. I'm going to pop Elena onto the screen now. Hi, Elena. We're glad to have you here tonight. And Elena is a longtime friend of yours through the art world and through theater and acting, because you have as I said, you have so many wonderful different circles of friends. And I know one of the things Elaine is going to talk about is the photos in the book. And she knows quite a lot about good photography because her late husband was a very highly acclaimed documentary photographer. So, Elena, we're thrilled you're here.
Well, I'm thinking of the day that I met Stephanie. I was buying art for a client for their offices and for the chairman of the board's offices. And we just hit it off at Pace Prints in Manhattan. And I thought, well, I've got to see that lovely woman again. And I think like the next day, we showed up for a totally different event. We joined an acting group. I didn't know about me being there. I didn't know about her being there. And we not only became good friends, but we shared scenes together and some very silly scenes, but anything from, I don't know, Oscar Wilde to Noel Coward. And Durang, Christopher Durang, and
Right.
Anyway, we did several years of that, as I recall, Stephanie. and loved it, just loved it. And I was always so bad about remembering my lines. And I thought, well, couldn't I just ad lib this? Well, that's not very nice for the other actor. But somehow Stephanie helped me get through it. And years later, my husband was not feeling so well, and he was older. And Mike had a terrible heart attack at some point, and we convinced you to come over after the hospital, and we did a reading together with the group, with our acting group, and it really helped her. And she was willing to try. Mm-hmm. Then she said, "We got to join this singing group for people who love to sing but think they can't." And that was me. I went right in, and before you know it, we were in a cabaret group. And but Stephanie always comes with me to photography events, and I think you went with me. You were my special guest for Bert's show at the Milk Gallery downtown, and we had a great time. And we always find something to do afterwards, like a really good restaurant that serves good martinis. And as I saw her photos coming across from her emails, I love the poems, but then the photos came. And I said, well, I didn't even know. I know she can sell art. She can knit anything, crochet anything, make jewelry, make beautiful drawings from her drawing class recently. But I didn't know that she took any photos seriously. So these were very impressive to me. And they reminded me of Saul LeWitt because they were, they had these grids, and I thought, well, these are really strong. And then I realized that someone I know very well, Mary Engel's mother, Ruth Orkin, spent her whole career taking photographs outside her window on Central Park West. And it was, I think she called her the world through my window. And so there was that connection. But now, I just have to say, then I'll stop. But I mean, Mike and Stephanie always invited me to join them whenever they rented a place in Florida. So I was the special guest, and I always got the best room. And so first night I always said, let me buy you a martini. So we would pick the best bar and we would order our martinis, 3 the same, very dry, vodka martinis, 3 olives. Right. And that would get us going. And but I love being with them, and I love being with Stephanie. And the photos are damned impressive. I'm looking forward to more. I don't know what she's going to do next, but maybe they'll her new project.
Exactly.
Thank you, Elena. I don't know what I'm going to do next either.
But I'm right there if you need me.
Okay. Elena, by the way, has been a tremendous help, especially this week, but we won't go into that.
Don't go into that.
Well, Elena, we're going to be bringing you back in just a minute. We're so happy to have you here. And right now, I'm thinking of that Elton John song, "Can You Feel the Love Tonight?" And I'm sure, Stephanie, you were feeling surrounded by it. Awesome. And I hope you are, not only with all your friends who are here with us in this broadcast, but you've got so many friends watching live right now. And I think what we're hearing is there's like nothing you can't do, which you're just such an incredibly talented, and you are a brave person. I know you don't like to hear the word brave, but you are. And there's another poem that I know you're gonna read now, because it's towards, I think it actually is the last poem, because as we said, the poems do go from obviously what you were going through in the beginning, that great loss and grief, and then starting to realize that we were all grieving, and which is what makes this book that's so relatable to everyone. But then the wonderful thing is we start to see you feeling those glimmers of hope. And there's this wonderful last poem, and I'm going to pop up one of your wonderful images here while you read that one.
Okay. By the way, for those who don't know, it's an image of the boathouse, which was all locked up too. Phase 1, this is June 8th, 2020. Today, the lockdown is officially over after 100 days. How will that change our lives? It has already changed mine. It has forced me to figure out how I want to live the rest of my life. Happily.
That's such a beautiful message. And that's a message I think that we can all take home with us tonight, is that happily message. And the fact that you could find that in your most darkest grieving moment is just really so wonderful. And right now we have another very special guest with us, because it's your daughter, Danielle. Danielle, here you are with you're so beautiful with your beautiful mom. And I know that this was very much your personal loss too. You were going through this and grieving, and I can only imagine how hard it was for you too, not to be with your mom at some of these times when you wanted to be here, or for her to be able to comfort you as well. And we know that you're a teacher too, and that you've been taking some writing courses. So we'd love to hear some of your thoughts on your mom's wonderful accomplishment here with her poems.
Thank you. And I'm just so appreciative of what everyone has said so far. It really gave a whole history of what Mom was about, is about, and continues to do. So when I learned about writing is that it's survival. So it was perfect when I knew that Mom started writing the poems, because when I was learning to do some writing, it was that's all you can do sometimes, is like get your thoughts and feelings on paper. Mm-hmm. And that once you do that, it gives you a frame of what it is you're grappling with and what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your head. And once you don't even know what you're going to write until you write it. So once you're able to read it back, it makes you feel a little more at ease, because you can identify and frame your feelings. And I was thinking about little kids when they're upset and they have a meltdown, and you have to like talk them through it and name their feelings for them, and they feel better when you can kind of explain what's going on. And I felt like Mom's poems you could identify with what she was feeling, and it helped me identify what I was feeling, not just about my grief, but about the pandemic itself and the frustration of not getting to see our family and our friends when we were sad, and we were sad that they couldn't come and help us and hug us and be with us. So writing really, it made me feel more at ease, because I was able to frame my feelings and bring them to the surface, and then at the same time understand what Mom was feeling too. And her frustrations and sadness was a little bit different than ours, but all relatable. And I think anybody that suffered a loss, or anybody that was grappling with the isolation of the pandemic, could relate to the poems.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Danielle has been there from day one, and I really appreciate it. Not just about the poetry.
Well, yeah, but it was weird when we were together. I'm sorry, I'm like off center. When we were together in the beginning, I felt like we were really focused on the pandemic and like how I was going to keep her safe and still support what was just happening. And it was like we ate meals together, we talked, we did, like we had lists of things that we had to get done, but like our feelings were suppressed because we had to do these things together. And so I was happy to read the poems each day and talk to Mom each day after we spent those initial 3 days together.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. And I know it's still very difficult for both of you, and it's still very raw and new. So the fact that you're able to come on and share your feelings, I know you're really helping a lot of other people listening tonight too. So I think that is really so special. So Danielle, we're going to keep you right where you are. And because we're going to have a few of your friends to come back for a very special toast, and I'm going to be going away to make room for some of them.
Before you leave, Cheryl, I just want to thank you, because this couldn't have happened without you. I really mean it.
Well, I'm just
from the very beginning.
I am so privileged. I'm so privileged to call you a friend, and now call you a poet, along with all of your other titles, playwright. art person. So I do want to say, though, as your publisher, before we close, this is a really, really beautiful book. I've got a little bit of glare on it. Dear Me, it's available on Amazon. It's available at booksellers everywhere. It's a wonderful gift for all of us to have, and it's a book you'll keep picking up and reading and looking at. And it is a wonderful book to give as a gift and to share with everyone we know, because as we start in the beginning, on some level collectively, we've all been through this together, and we've all lost a lot, and we've all grieved on some level too. So Stephanie, really from the bottom of my heart, I salute you and want to toast you in my personal toast for sharing your knowledge. I know you started to do it for you, but the fact that you decided to share it with the world is very special. So we're very happy to have you in our world and that you've done this. So I'm going to, you and Danielle stay right there, because I'm going to remove me and bring back some of your other friends for a special closing toast.
Thank you.
Yay, Mom.
Hi. Hi there. Okay, we're here.
We're here, and I'm going to raise my glass first because I'm very good at that.
So
Stephanie,
we're right with you.
I don't know what you're going to do next, but I really do hope you'll include your friends, because we love it. We just love it. And we forgot to say that you were a dancer, and Mike gave you a birthday party once, a surprise birthday at a belly dancing club restaurant, and that was sensational. Anyway, Stephanie, I love you. I'm so proud of you. And as I always said to Mike in front of you, I'll follow her anywhere.
Thank you.
Here's
Cheers.
Thank
looking at you.
everybody. Also, I want to thank all my friends that aren't here tonight, but I want to thank the ones that are, and my family that isn't here, other than Danielle. And there's a very, very short, as you might imagine, acknowledgement page in my book that thanks everyone for being there at the most difficult time and giving me love and support.
I've got my book.
And Stephanie, to your many surprises in the future, although it's hard to know how many more you can produce, but to your many, and to the memory of Mike, just such a wonderful man who you gave a wonderful life to as he did to you, and to with condolences and with a gratitude for you sharing all of your thoughts with us.
Thank you. And
Cheers.
people who are watching too.
Cheers.
Thank you.